Hey, what's up guys, aarava here and welcome back to a brand new video here today, and welcome back to another Let's Talk F1 video. And today we're discussing the Mercedes W10 and their effectively new B-Spec car. In a way, they've rocked up to week 2 testing, with obviously week 2 testing began today on Tuesday, day number 5 in total, or day 1 of week 2, and Mercedes have a lot of upgrades on their cars, to the point where almost a lot of people I've seen on the timeline, the insiders in the paddock are kind of almost calling it a bit of a new car essentially, and a B-Spec car for Mercedes. Whether it was a pre-planned kind of major overhaul of the entire package, we don't know. The Mercedes Twitter account replied to a few people saying it was a pre-planned thing, like all of these things were already known to be coming basically for the entire time, and they on purpose left it to week 2 to bring. That is a possibility, because we've seen in the past Mercedes have been a team to hold the cards close to the chest. Remember last year with testing, they didn't do any low fuel runs. It was all high fuel, all long runs, and then they rocked up with Australia, and Hamilton got pole by a fair odd way to second place. So Mercedes have done that before, and I think they're kind of doing that again in testing, because again Hamilton was only, I think, 8th in today's testing time, so they're still not concentrating on actual lap times themselves, which is very much the Mercedes way. But you know what, I'm skeptical this time of how much this really was a pre-planned thing, because we've heard so much, as we discussed in the pit lane podcast I did over the weekend there. If you haven't seen that video, by the way, we did a lot of talking about the entire grid, and not just the Mercedes car, but the entire grid, and looking at it, there's a lot of talk about the Ferrari and Alfa Romeo style wings compared to the Mercedes cars, and also just how good that Ferrari car is looking, how comfortable it looks compared to the Mercedes package. And so I don't know, I'm kind of half and half. Let me know what you guys think in the comments below. Do you think this raft of upgrades was perhaps pre-planned, or was it a bit of a panic sort of, okay, over the weekend after week 1 they really got on it and they try to finish off these ideas that might have been well in the woodworks, because obviously in F1 you can't take ideas and make them reality in a couple of days. So a lot of it was probably in the pipelines, but I think some of the tweaks here were perhaps maybe ideas they had on the back burner maybe, and they've rushed through for week 2 to try and combat maybe some of the issues. We heard Valtteri Bottas literally say in an interview at the end of week 1 testing that they need upgrades to help the handling and the drivability of the car, and so a lot of these might be that, because obviously pretty every single one is an aerodynamic update, but I think a lot of them will be counteracting that drivability kind of issue, and then a few of them you could say are counteracting that Ferrari wing kind of idea and that debate going on. But you've been seeing the photos of the Mercedes in week 2 as I've been talking for this little intro part of the video, but let's go in and deep dive and actually circle out, as you can see, all the different upgrades to this car. A lot of stuff going on here, so that's why I say it really is almost like a Mercedes B-Spec car, because the car does look very different in many different aspects. So let's kind of look into that. So we're going to start off with the front area, which is the most kind of obvious, I guess, in a way. So they've got a brand new nose structure, and the way the nose blends into the snowplow cape, if you will. So we've talked about that cape structure that Mercedes have had now for, I think, a year and a bit more, I think, or possibly even 2 years. I can't really remember now. So long ago, maybe they introduced it. But they've had this cape that obviously drags air and scoops up air from the front and kind of guides it and chucks it underneath the car and also towards the Sidepod bargeboard area from the front end there. And so they've changed it. They've changed the nose structure essentially. They made it a little bit thinner before then going a little bit wider in a way and having this kind of mushroom-like bump, pregnancy bump in a way almost at the nose cone. And it's really just more about the profiling of how the nose, you can see on the edge here, blends into that snowplow cape essentially. So you can see the entire front end is straightened up a little bit more as well, so that might help a little bit of airflow if the nose is a little bit more straight compared to it previously was. But it's more about the profile and the blending in shape of the snowplow to try and help maybe more air get scooped over and under of that plow, because they've actually done some really cool arching, which you'll see in a different angle of the actual snowplow itself, to actually curl some air underneath the actual cape and drag air that way, as well as scooping it on over the top here. So trying to just get a bit more airflow and trying to improve that efficiency perhaps towards the bargeboard area. And then we look at the front wing end plate. Now this is more kind of looking into, not solving their issues, because they're definitely not going to solve it to the point where it's going to be a Ferrari wing, but and it might not be an issue obviously, but that debate of, is the Mercedes Red Bull route of a front wing better than the Ferrari Alfa Romeo Toro Rosso kind of route of, Mercedes have got this, high angle of the flaps uniformly all connect to the end plate, whereas Ferrari straighten up and gone for the extreme Alfa Romeo, the most extreme strategy of having the flaps really converge and sink into the bottom of the end plate and let a lot of air pass through, flat face, free flow, and also making the end plate do a lot of the turning in terms of the airflow and trying to get that vortice on the outside of the front tire and try and clean up some rotation coming off the front tire and generally just get some air downstream of the car. So they now cut out a bit of the end plate here, and they've also curled it outwards. So previously on the old wing Mercedes had last week, the end plate curled inwards, so in towards the inside of the car, you know, if you follow my mouse basically. Now they've curled it a little bit more outward. It's quite subtle, but it's there. It's a curve outward, and with the cutting as well, that's going to immediately obviously let air straight through a little bit earlier, curling over from the inside face to the outside face due to the pressure differential, and that's going to create that turning force. Now that would already happen anyway, but now that they've cut a little glimpse out of the end plate, that obviously happens a little bit lower down, a little bit earlier in a way, as the air kind of goes through from the front face all the way to the back. It's going to happen earlier and curl out, and with that actual full face curve of the end plate coming out this way, it's going to encourage that air to turn around and get it sweeping around the outside tire. Now, that is not going to be obviously a dramatic, solution perhaps to, maybe their gamble. We don't know, honestly, obviously yet, but, a lot of people are saying maybe Mercedes have gambled on the wrong, concept of the front wing, and therefore a lot of the airflow of the entire car, really. But we won't know until we get to the season. If it's an issue that won't get fixed for 3 months. If they are even going to try and fix it, they might just go full hog and try and do this concept the best they can, because, Red Bull on the other side of things, no one's really talked too much about Red Bull being worried, because they themselves say the numbers look good for them. So, it might not be, maybe it's just all kind of media hype, I guess, from the paddock, but this is a kind of maybe solution to having that lack of turning force around the front tire for Mercedes there. Then we get to the kind of middle part of the car, or the kind of still the front. You've got these deflectors, the nice little horns here, looking very, very aggressive, and, kind of harking back, not obviously as aggressive as it used to be, but those back in the day, 08, 07 cars with the massive horn winglets on the very front, deflecting air, and essentially they got these smaller deflectors here. Obviously, they're not allowed a huge kind of, horn arrangement, because that's not within the regulations, but they've done as much as they can, basically, and got these two deflectors, essentially just making sure the air is pushed out to either side of the chassis there. And actually, you can see the attachment is either side of the S duct, essentially. So the S duct injecting air on the top face of that chassis, and then so the deflectors are kind of pushing any other air on the left and right of the S duct away, basically, so it's uninterrupted and as smooth as possible on that top face of the chassis. And also, you can see directly will maybe try and correlate with this wing then they've attached, which is the Ferrari Alfa Romeo kind of style wing on the kind of near to the top edge of the chassis. Probably, they've definitely tried to maybe do it in a way where you can kind of almost imagine the air bouncing around, being deflected off that deflector, then hitting this wing and curving down towards the side pod and barge rod area, and effectively the inlet as well. And then we get to the side part, the end plate of the side pods. They've got a new structure in terms of the uprights they've now got more of a chunkier, full width kind of upright, essentially. It used to be kind of 3 partition. They've now only got 2 partitions, essentially, because they've extended the kind of size and piece of one of those uprights. Then we get to the floor. You've got these 6 different deflectors and a lot more detail on the slot gaps, a lot more aggressive in terms of the number of slot gaps, and trying to get, towards maybe the aggression levels we've been seeing with Ferrari. Ferrari are the first kind of team from last season to really start developing the floor so much in this way, with slot gaps and arrangements, and really working it. And like I've said, with the car launches, I think this year, this area of the car is going to be something we see a lot of teams trying to work with, especially the midfield guys, maybe trying to catch up with the top folk. And then from this angle, you can't see it, but Mercedes have made their side pods even more slimmer in a way. They've done a lot of architecture change on the inside with the engine, and the way they've essentially, I guess, mounted some of the cooling stuff they have to go. Obviously, engine stuff is not really my forte, so I wouldn't really be able to tell you what they've done and how they've done it, but they've essentially moved stuff around, because you'll see from a different angle, basically an indent on the side pod, and it's kind of almost like last year's indent. The Mercedes side pods of last year had this very aggressive indent as it went into that Coke bottle shape, whereas this year it was quite smooth. Don't get me wrong, the side pods were already slimmer than last year on this year's Mercedes W10, but they had a much more smoother transition with that Coke bottle shape. But now they've got this indent on the very top face of the side pod there, where they've clearly just taken away, managed to find some space there. So, freeing up, obviously, air to flow through there and making a bit of a slimmer arrangement. And then they've got the more aggressive T-wing, the 2-prong arrangement, and then a down-facing end plate on the edge. So again, trying to work with the rear wing, the upwash, and trying to make that entire rear end as efficient as possible. So like we had with 2017, where teams started off with only one section for the T-wing and then eventually went to two. I think in the end, Force India had three configurations. So don't be surprised if you see a lot of teams eventually getting the kind of maybe even three-prong array T-wing on that area of the car. So a lot of changes on the Mercedes car from this angle. We're going to go look into some different angles and kind of go a little bit even deeper and just show you the details of that. Right, so looking at the side pod area, this is the dent I'm talking about. You can see the lighting really shows it off quite well. So you've got the normal sweep of the actual side pod itself coming off the actual inlet side. You can see with the kind of my mouse the shape of it, and then straight away here it just dents in and then continues on with the Coke bottle shape. So they've done some clever packaging underneath there to save some space and indent that, essentially get more air passing through that area. So very nice stuff from Mercedes in that kind of way. And then the detailing on the floor, you can see the three deflectors pushing the air. You can see the way they're curved outwards, so trying to, force air a little bit to the outside maybe, and also trying to shape the air as it goes towards this area of the car where you've got that actual Coke bottle shape going in. And then just the amount of slot gaps they got, squirting air towards this inside face of the rear tyre, that area in between the rear tyre and the rear wing, trying to get that as vacuum sealed as possible to make the diffuser work as efficiently as possible. And then we move to the top and you've got a nice zoomed in shot of that two-prong T-wing attached to the kind of shark fin stabilizer arrangement of the Mercedes car, working again, like I said, with the rear wing. Different angle now for the front shot, and you can see I've tried to maybe kind of put out in yellow lines the kind of geometry of the cape. So you can see this curve right here is actually underneath the cape, because this is the actual top face of the cape. So the air will be scooped into this basically and get chucked over towards the bargeboard area through the suspension arms. But then you've got this curling motion, which is a lot more chiseled and kind of defined with this new nose structure to allow air to pass underneath, and underneath the air will still be attached underneath that cape and be chucked to the underneath of the car. And obviously a lot of stuff goes underneath the car, all the channel airs on the floor underneath to get towards the rear end. And then here again you can see that curling out motion. This angle definitely you can see a little bit better, that curving out, angling outside to push air to this outside, create a vortice on this outside face of the front tire, and that little cut off bit of the end plate to allow the air to roll through a little bit earlier. Then you got the horns, which for aesthetically I really like as well, but obviously nice detailing to work again with the wings they've got on the chassis. And also, I didn't mention it, they've also now added a wing onto the halo there. So they launched without a wing on the halo. The entirety of last year they never had a wing. I think they trialed it a few times, but now they've got a wing, so they might take it off. It might be another trial, obviously, being testing, but they've added that onto the halo as well. And then again, just another shot of the T-wing. They're extending out as much as they can, are allowed to, on the rear end. And then finally, looking at the side pod and bargeboard area, you've got the two different winglets, really nice curvature. You can see the way it flexes from the top face and then curves inwards on itself to try and chuck some air through on the underside as well as the top face there. And you can see the way they've got this now overarching wing that they've extended. They had this already, but it kind of cut off here last week on last week's car, essentially. And so they've extended that to try and really navigate the air very much, you can see, to this area directly. This wing will maybe try and chuck it into the inlet, and then you've got this wing taking air from this underside and working in tandem, and then really just forcing it down towards, hopefully if it stays attached, all the way down to this part of the actual side pod and bargeboard area. And then they've extended the boomerang arrangement, and they've got these new pieces and elements of the bargeboard and two cut-ins now, which they didn't have before. And then this part, again, like I said, it was a three cut or a three upright with two cuts. They've now only got one cut and two pieces on the upright now, so perhaps just trying to keep the flow a bit more attached. They felt maybe the extra slot gap wasn't necessary, and they want to have this a little bit of a longer arrangement to keep the airflow attached to this actual surface area face a little bit longer and try and keep it a bit more smoother as it goes downstream of the car. So a lot of change on the Mercedes car, and like I said, enough change where I would say I would call it a B-Spec car in a way, because we call the McLaren a B-Spec when it had so much of this change last year at the Spanish Grand Prix. And I think this, honestly, the Mercedes cars changed way more than the McLaren did the Spanish Grand Prix last year. So this is definitely a B kind of spec car, essentially. They may as well call it the W10B. But yeah, so that is the kind of talk of the Mercedes cars. So interesting. We'll see if they keep a lot of this stuff. Obviously, it is testing, so they're going to test it and see if it works. Like I said, let me know what you think in the comments below about, if a lot of this was pre-planned or some of it might have been a little bit of panicking in terms of maybe bringing some upgrades faster than they maybe wanted to, perhaps. I don't know. It just seems very odd to keep all of this stuff behind. Like, maybe, I could maybe agree with maybe, there was so much, new parts here that maybe it's a case of even a team like Mercedes just didn't have the time to get all these bits ready for week one. But then you also think they are the reigning world champions for so long. I feel like they have the manpower and the money to chuck at this project to bring all these parts in week one. So maybe they threw a massive dummy for week one. That wouldn't be out of the question. I would think Mercedes could be a team like that. Or, like I said, it could just be a bit of a, responding to what they had in week one. But either way, let me know what you think about it in the comments below. If you are new around here, do subscribe for weekly F1 content. I'm aarava. Hope you enjoyed the day, and I'll see you guys next time. Goodbye.